Hey gun people! Figured I would I just got back from while it's still fresh. I ran through the rain. I had to go give the boys some carrots and a little snack. Let y'all hear the big downpour and the big rain that's coming through Texas. So I went over to Plano this morning, and I'll put a link to their website. I think it's stopthebleeding.org is the name of the website. But I'll put it in the description. And they have this free class where they have all these trauma nurses kind of going over how to stop the bleeding. And there was a couple things that I kind of learned that I wouldn't have done before. And I asked a couple questions that, because a lot of times when I do something on my tourniquets or I do some video, I get a lot of comments from people who are combat medics or whoever, and they, nurses, even a couple doctors that make comments. And in the military, I know they're teaching high and tight for the tourniquet. I was always taught 2 to 3 inches above the injury. And people were like, no, they changed that, it's high and tight now. Well, so I asked one of the trauma nurses there during this class on Stop the Bleeding, is that true, or is that, what's the status? And he goes, we're still teaching 2 to 3 inches above the injury, because if I have an injury here and you don't want to put it on the elbow, and higher is better, if you put it above here, and this is a gross example, but when you put it too far above the injury, you have what's called pooling, he said. And you have another cavity that it's still bleeding into this area, and you're still losing blood. So, I mean, I don't understand it technically, but he was like, you don't want to put the tourniquet higher than you need to, and 2 to 3 inches is optimal. Now, he did say if you tourniquet put it on and it doesn't stop the bleeding, put a second tourniquet above the first tourniquet. Now he didn't say like 5 inches above. It's right next to it. Basically, you're putting 2 tourniquets on the wound instead of 1 if you can't get it stopped with 1 tourniquet. So he cleared that up. And then the other thing they were talking about is for packing. And I was always kind of taught direct pressure for injuries and stop the bleeding. And if they were like, man, if you got, that was a good lightning strike. We might get a good boom out of that one. If you've got a hole or an injury or even a slice, an opening, they're teaching pack gauze in that hole. And he goes, you can use as much as you want. You can't overpack it. And if you don't have gauze, your sock, a shirt, t-shirt, cloth, anything that fills up that cavity will help slow down the bleeding, and that's the key. What do they say, 5 liters of blood in the body, and if you lose 2, you're going to die. I think some doctor. I'll put a link to it, and I think they have, I think everybody can get to their little website or training or PowerPoint. If not, I'll make a copy of the PowerPoint. PowerPoint wasn't that great. To me, what was good afterwards, they had all the different gauze and the tourniquet and the different things to put it and you pack it. It was only an hour and a half class. They teach them free across the country. And they're starting it, some surgeons got together and went, a lot of people are bleeding out. And they're learning this kind of like at a couple of the mass shootings and the bombings, the Boston bombing, a lot of people, I think he said, the numbers may be off, 13 to 17 people were saved by makeshift tourniquets. Not professional buy tourniquets, just makeshift. Whether it was a rope, a belt, a cloth, something to tie around the wound and stop the bleeding. And I want to say it was either 13 or 17 people were saved by makeshift tourniquets at that. So what they're trying to teach is, and I mean, in law enforcement and military, you get basic first aid, and you can go to a little advanced, etc. And you're kind of exposed to a lot of this. If you're a cop for a while, you see a lot of accidents, you see medical do a lot of training, you're required to keep up with certain stats. But for the normal person, what they're trying to do is make it available free, that if stopping the bleeding is right up there with you know, CPR used to be the big thing, and now they don't even teach breaths, they're just teaching compressions. They're kind of making stop the bleeding kind of like CPR. Keep it simple, give some basic things, but stopping bleeding can save a lot of people. And you don't have to have a whole lot of experience, and you can use things that are around you.
We teach three things: how to use your hands to stop bleeding, how to use a hemostatic dressing, which is a gauze impregnated with a substance that can stop bleeding, and then how to use a tourniquet.
The guy I was talking to and all the nurses, they had like 8 or different trauma nurses there with all the experience in the trauma center. It was in Plano. And pretty much all of them were like the gauze with the clot material in it. I forgot what it's called, but basically it's, instead of just a package of quick clot that people put in there, the gauze with the quick clot is what they're using on the ambulances and in the trauma center to stop the bleeding and to get it in there. So, and if you don't have that, obviously he said your shirt, anything to fill up the cavity to cause blood to slow down and give up something to clot on to help start seal that wound till you get them to the ER. Another little thing that they brought up that I thought was kind of interesting was during the Orlando, was it a bar? I don't even know what he was talking about. He said the Orlando, I thought he said shooting or bombing. I don't know what the hell. I haven't looked it up. But he said, or she said, there was a couple different instructors. I think it was a female that said this. She said when somebody says call 911, a lot of times they don't designate one person to call, and we were always told that, make sure one person has that responsibility, because if you just yell out in a crowd of people, someone call 911, everybody thinks someone else is going to do it, or everybody does it. So they said during the Orlando shooting, 911 received 6,200 911 calls just for that one incident. So they said if you get too much, then you can't get good information, and if everybody's reporting the same thing, it doesn't really help. Once it gets reported, it's reported. But they're not saying not to report, they're just saying it's better if you designate 1 or 2 people, make sure it's done, and if somebody can say 911's notify the ambulance en route, then we know not to keep telling people to call 911. So overall, good little class. I didn't learn a whole bunch. Like I said, I didn't know that stuffing. I would have never took gauze. They've got a couple little foam things there and a fake leg with a couple injuries. One with a slash and one with a hole. And the little slash wound, when you opened it up, it was pretty deep and big underneath. On top, it just looked like a little slit. And he said, even if blood's coming out of here, just start shoving gauze in there. And I mean, it was a lot of gauze that he shoved. I went, you're going to put that much in a wound? I said, isn't digging in a hole and packing in a hole doing more damage? And the theory is, if you don't stop the bleeding, even if you do a little more damage, if you don't stop the bleeding, they're going to die anyway. So stopping the bleeding is important. It's right up there with CPR, obviously. Someone else asked a question. If I'm doing CPR by myself and they've got blood, am I doing more damage by CPR? Every time I chest compression, I see blood squirting out. So should I, the trauma nurse, his response was chest compressions. Doesn't matter if you're pumping the blood out of him, because if he dies from no oxygen and lack of circulation, it doesn't matter whether he has blood in him or not. So chest compressions are more important. You've got to, if they stop breathing, you want those chest compressions, then you worry about the blood. Obviously, if 2 people, he was like, put some direct pressure, try to do it, keep compressions, but if you're only one person, you can only do what you want to do. Another thing they brought up, which I kind of always knew this as a cop, but I don't know if everyone else knows this, is a lot of people are injured giving aid. And they're telling and teaching people, look, if you give aid, your safety is first. You don't want to create another emergency from you getting hurt. And I guess at this trauma center, it was some crazy number, like 6 people in the last 3 months were hit changing a tire by a car. So they're changing a tire too close to the road and they get run over. To me, that kind of goes to stupid, but they're mentioning it that, you know, nobody can think anymore, pull off the damn highway. So they're telling people, make sure you pull off the highway before you can change your tire next to moving traffic so you don't get hit. So anyway, I just figured I'd cover a couple of those little things. It was kind of interesting. You can go to the website, you can go to the link if you want to go do it. Those are about the only two things I got up. Most of it was pretty basic. If you've got any basic first aid and burst life-saving, you're probably not going to need it. They have a tourniquet there for training, show you how to put it on one-on-one. I mean, it wasn't rocket science, but I figured I would go just because when I read it, it seemed interesting, and it was only an hour and a half, and it gave us access to some traumators that see a lot of trauma. And they showed a couple of pictures, not real bad, of an ankle or a foot that was pretty much cut off, and another guy, he got his leg cut off. If they didn't put a tourniquet on and stop the bleeding, he would have died. So they're just really trying to get the word out. Stopping that bleeding is important. And they're learning a lot about injuries from Afghanistan. We've had so much medical advances and figured out how to save people in critical incidents from the war. Oh man, that was a great lightning. I wish I'd have been facing that way. That was like cool. Anyway, I figured I'd pass it on. So that's Stop the Bleeding. I want to say .org or something, but the raining has stopped. Getting a little thunder. I don't see a whole bunch of lightning. The lightning was way back there a couple minutes ago, but all right, we'll end that there.